Good.
Hello and welcome back to our next conversation that is part of our inaugural Empower-a-thon. If this is the first interview or first conversation that you're catching, so glad that you're here. I'm Clarissa Constantine. I'm the founder of the Parent Tween Connection. And the Parent Tween Foundation is the entity that is working to bridge the financial gap between families and the professionals who can serve them. So we've got professionals coming in throughout the month between Mother's Day and Father's Day. They've all donated their time and they've all said, yes, we're going to help to promote this whole event to help families as much as we can. And what we're going to do is ask you, our listeners, if you get good nuggets out of what you're hearing here, the way that you can say thank you is by making a donation to the Parent Tween Foundation. So with all that out of the way, by the way, if you have questions, just make sure that you're popped over to our Facebook group. I do have it open on another monitor so that if you want to join us as we chat, I can bring you in. You can ask questions from Melissa. That's all the housekeeping. We're done. Melissa, hi, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I am quite well. I'm thrilled to have you here. So for those of you listening in, Melissa lives down in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And she is a certified health and life coach. And one of the things that attracted me to inviting her to speak is that she has a certification from Stanford University, specifically in child nutrition and cooking. And that piqued my interest because I'm actually a former personal trainer, as is my husband. And I think that food and exercise are the most overlooked and therefore underutilized pieces of the mental health puzzle. Again, I'm going to establish there is a place, I do believe, for medication, therapy, coaching, all the things. But I just don't think we pay enough attention to what we put in our bodies and how we treat our bodies.
Agreed, 100%.
So that was the background in terms of me inviting Melissa to participate. So we're going to start. I mean, we know kids are dealing with all kinds of cray-cray. It's only been exacerbated since the pandemic. It's only been made worse because as the adults, we're still going a little bit nuts, right? And trying to figure out where our equilibrium is. And yet we've got kids who just won't eat their broccoli or, whatever. So like, where do we even start? Like, I guess maybe like, how does food play in the first place from your perspective as the coach?
Yeah, food has such a huge impact, Clarissa. And I think like many of us growing up, I just thought food was only connected to weight. So that was my association, food and weight. Want to lose weight? You cut out the food. Want to gain weight? You add more food. I didn't know about the impact of food on overall health, mental, emotional, social, until I had my own experience. And so really food has such an impact on mood and mental health and emotional health. And, we can talk about gut health and the impact that the gut health has on the brain. And they're so connected. Our body, the systems are just so interconnected. And like you said, we've negated the impact of food and exercise on overall health and well-being. So the connection is huge and largely overlooked.
Absolutely. So we're not just talking about the impact of food on the adults, but obviously on the kids. So, so many families that I've seen, whether they've got littles or whether they've got teenagers, like they won't eat their broccoli. They won't eat their green beans. They, if it's green, it's gross, and they want pasta and butter and not that there's a place for those, but like, they're grabbing a bag of Cheetos on the way out the door. So like, how do we even share this with them in the first place for them to understand how the food impacts themselves so that we can help them avoid having to go through what you went through in terms of your own personal experience. But like, how do we even start this conversation with them in the first place?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. I think first of all, you can ask, how are you feeling? Like, because I think once you realize that food can either really make you feel energetic and amazing, or it can really drain your energy and deplete you. Like, I think kind of helping them connect the dots on how foods make them feel with their energy, with their moods, with their work, with their relationships. I think that's a good starting point. But then I think just having some buy-in, I'm your parent and I really want to help you be healthy. And part of that is making sure you're getting the vitamins and minerals that you need. So how about if we go to the store together and kind of come up with a plan? I think one thing I've seen with my kids is that the more ownership and the more of a voice they have in the process, the more likely they are to be on board instead of mom says so, you have to do it. Like if they're bought in and they're asking for things. I think that's huge. I think another thing that I've noticed with our 15-year-old Clarissa is that she doesn't like vegetables the way that we cook them. Like I usually put them in the pan with some olive oil, some like garlic salt. She doesn't like it that way. She likes them roasted. So I think too, kind of getting them in the kitchen, maybe working with you, alongside you, trying new things, making it fun, experimental, seeing what they like. That goes a long way too, because last night we had asparagus. What kids eat asparagus? And this was not always the case. Like, not at all. So like, I want people to know that it's trying and tweaking and doing different things and seeing what they like.
So when you set out, to tune in and asking them how they feel, what length of a time frame are the words that I wanted to use? Should we be asking them that? Because it's not, they're going to be like, oh, I feel good because it tastes yummy and it's sweet and it's salty and all, it just tastes good to my taste buds. What's the longer time frame that's an appropriate inquiry for that or an observation for them?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I have a 4-day energy experiment that I take people through, and I like that because it's kind of playing with different things over the course of 4 days. Like on this day, I'm going to eat, more plant protein. On this day, I'm going to have more animal protein, and kind of mixing things up and really seeing how things settle. Because like you said, yeah, we eat it, it tastes good. If it has sugar in it, we're going to feel great, but then we're going to crash. And so I think giving time and space over a couple of days to see how things settle can be really insightful.
So even like 1 day is enough to start seeing some impact. Because I know, like I've discovered recently that if I have ice cream, man, it is a ticket to the pillow.
Yep.
Within 15 minutes, So I didn't know if that was the case just from a digestive process or because it was already whatever, all the things. So, all right. So a day, even 2 days, something like that. And probably a case of like giving them insight, like, hey, we're going to do this. Like, we're going to do an experiment as a family, something like that. Right.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So how does food actually impact things like mental health? Because I know we've got a lot of families that are, I think correctly, like appropriately concerned about the mental health specifically. So what are some of the things that we need to be looking at that? Because there's certainly an energy aspect, but I think for a lot of kids, they're going to be like, well, I don't know if it was that I have more plant-based or that so-and-so was a jerk at school.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That it is making me feel this way.
Yeah.
So can you just give us some insight as, broad strokes? Like what are some of the things that positively and or negatively impact mental health concerns?
Yeah, I think anxiety, there's a huge correlation between foods that cause anxiety. Just for me, I'm a trauma survivor. I was diagnosed with PTSD from childhood trauma. So I think for me, I've noticed with that and having a child that has a little of my anxious tendencies, that when we eat more whole foods, when we're, more like foods that aren't processed, they don't have a lot of preservatives, chemicals, that sort of thing, that does better for us. Gluten has also been connected to anxiety. Again, we're all different and we're all unique. It's not one size fits all, but I do think the more whole foods based you can go, no food dyes, like very low preservatives, very little chemicals, that's the best route for everybody regardless. And then if there is anxiety and things like that, cutting out gluten might be helpful as well.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So then those are some of the things, obviously that are going to be supportive. Let's chat a bit about, we already kind of went there a little bit with like getting the kids in the kitchen, getting them involved, helping them do some of the meal planning, helping some of them do some of the cooking and such. Yeah. What types of things, keeping in mind like how crazy busy families are? I mean, you've got 2 kiddos right in the thick of it yourself, right? Like we've got this kid going to this activity, that kid going to the other activity. It takes 3 cars to get the 2 kids where they need to go, whatever, right? So like okay, great. We can go whole food. We can try to cut out gluten. We can try to go with fewer preservatives. But the reality is that the stuff that's easy to cook in the middle of the week is the stuff that has preservatives in it from a time perspective. So like, okay, great. This is the ideal. And I can just hear moms going, and you're on crack because that's just not realistic in my family.
Yep. I think it is realistic because, like you said, I'm like two kids in the thick of it. They both play sports. They're both super involved. And I think what has made the biggest difference for me, Clarissa, is planning out our meals. And this is going to sound crazy, but I swear if you try this, it could change things for you. Like looking at the week of events. So tonight we have awards at school. So that means that we're going to, I've already cooked the meatballs. Like, do a little bit of planning, kind of know what's going to go on. Last Tuesday, we had induction to National Honor Society. So that was a crock pot night, like kind of knowing what your schedule is and what your time is, and then building your meals around that can be really helpful. It doesn't need to be complex. Like a protein, a whole carb, and a veggie can be super easy. And you just throw the veggies in the oven, let them roast while you're doing the protein. Maybe put some rice in the microwave. Like it can be simple. It doesn't have to be overwhelming and complex because that's when we freeze and we stay stuck. So make it easy on yourself.
Well, and I'm glad to hear you say microwave because I've definitely heard people, and again, I'm not going to dispute one side or the other, right? Of like, microwaves are good for you. Like when I was growing up, we never had a microwave because my mother fully believed that they cause cancer.
Yep.
Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But there was never anything microwaved in my home. Now, my mother also didn't work, so she was able to make meals. Like she had a whole lot more time than a working mom would have. So, can you give us some ideas? I know you said like a protein, a carb, and a vegetable.
Yep.
What about snacks? What kinds of things can we do? Because I know. Now, I don't actually have kids, but I've got several friends who have kids right in this age that I'm pretty close to. And I know one of them, like I was at their house actually when he got home from school and like he didn't pass go. He didn't collect $200. He didn't even say hello. He went straight to the pantry to get food. And I was like, and he's 14.
He's hungry.
Right? So like what kinds of things can we do to supplement or for healthy snacking and such?
Yeah, for sure. You can always do, like, again, this might take a little bit of work on the weekends if you have time on this Sunday. Maybe chop some fresh veggies. You could add some dip. You could add some hummus. You could do fresh fruits. You could do nuts. This is processed, but we like the Made Good bars at our house. They're allergy friendly. They've got like vegetables kind of built in them. Those are kind of a hit. Popcorn. But a lot of times we'll do like the Made Good bars and fruits and veggies after school for snacks. There's a lot of combinations you can do. Like you could even do salami and cheese. You could do prosciutto and peppers. Like there's a myriad of items. It just kind of depends on your children's taste buds.
Well, there is that, right? And so if we've got kids who have fallen into a pattern of the pack of Cheetos and the Oreos, and let me be clear, pack of Cheetos has a place in my life. I'm just saying. Right? But if they're on that path where they're not comfortable eating these things, do you think, like, is it better to just like go cold turkey and be like, no more crap in the house? Or like, okay, every time you have a pack of Cheetos, I also want you to grab a carrot stick? Or
I don't think going cold turkey serves anybody. It never goes well. People get mad. It gets just feisty. So not my thing. I think, I love your suggestion of every time you have Cheetos, maybe have some carrots to go with it. And then even maybe get to a point where you could find some healthier Cheetos. Like this is going to sound crazy. And we haven't always been here. We used to be Cheetos, but now our kids will eat these chickpea puffs, and there's a nacho cheese one, and they taste like Cheetos and they kind of look like Cheetos. So I think if you can find some healthier like upgrades to kind of taste the same, but are a little bit more nutritious, that seems to go over well too.
All right. Good to know. So we've talked a bit about like the role that food plays, right? It's not just about weight. It does impact all the other things in our bodies and our minds. Sticking to more whole food based, perhaps less or no gluten, depending. And that's something that, somebody like you can help figure out. Food allergies, those types of things. I was amazed when I actually worked with a functional nutritionist and she did some blood work at all the things that I'm reactive to that I had no idea. And I was looking at it purely from a weight loss perspective, right? So I know there was one other point that you wanted to make, which was relative to the struggle with sugar, which many, many, many of us navigate. But if you're open to it, I'd like to punt another question your way.
Yeah.
All right. So before we come to a sugar struggle, this is something that I actually had a friend of mine reach out to. I've been working with her daughter on SAT and ACT, and the mom reached out to me and she was like, my daughter's having some weight issues.
Mm-hmm.
Can you coach on some lifestyle type stuff with her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are your suggestions?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's male, female, gender flexible, whatever gender we're dealing with, there's so much going on in their bodies at this time. There are so many social influences and the stress and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
If we've got a kiddo who we look at more like their diet straight up sucks.
Yeah.
And it's become like a triggering conversation with them with body image challenges.
Yeah.
What are some suggestions of where we can start with those kiddos?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually have a teen girl I'm working with, and her mom had the same question. So I asked the mom, I said, where do you feel like you're at with your relationship with food? Like, do you feel like you're in a good place with it? And are you open to sharing that with your daughter? Like, when I was your age, I struggled with this and I wish that I had the support. Or even now as a mom, I struggle with this and I'd love to have some support. So I would love, if you feel like this is something that's hard for you, would you consider maybe having someone mentor you in this area? So I think kind of not putting it on the teen per se, but more on the parent and like, I want to support you in this because I struggled with this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be powerful because we don't want to put stuff on those kids that's not there. But at the same time, if they're struggling, we want to be a safe place for them to come to us and share that. So I think the more open we can be, like, this was my struggle. I struggled with this when I was in high school. And then they'll say back when you had to walk to school because you didn't have a car, like, that kind of thing. But I think the more you can relate it to yourself and your journey and let them know, hey, I struggled with this too. And this is what helped me. I think that can be really, really powerful because then they don't feel alone in that.
Awesome. Because I know when I was a kid, I didn't necessarily have that aspect of the challenge, but my mom did.
Yeah.
And so I didn't necessarily learn overly healthy habits from her. And then I was fine until I got a desk job. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, at least I say fine, I should put fine in like air quotes here, right? That all of a sudden things kind of shifted, in the body and whatnot. So we actually just had a viewer asking if you have any suggestions as far as teen athletes and food intake and such. And I know that we were largely focusing on this more of like just how to help them eat healthy, but those are obviously kiddos who have unique needs.
Yeah, that's interesting because my kids are both athletes. So this is like something that's near and dear to me. I love with any student, but I think especially with athletes, really encouraging them to look at food as fuel to help them perform well, to help their mental clarity, to help their performance, to help their energy, to help their agility. And I think the more you can frame it at that level, the better that will be for them. I think it kind of depends on the sport because a volleyball player, their needs are very different than a track runner's needs, for example, because volleyball is kind of more sporadic with not as much running and endurance, whereas track. So I think part of it is sport specific, that will matter. But again, I think having the mindset of this is fuel, this is going to nourish you, clean food, staying hydrated, getting enough sleep, all of that plays into the role of athletes, but definitely making sure that they're getting the protein and the whole foods and the clean energy that their bodies need.
For sure. And I imagine that's another case where it's kind of like trial, right?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like, let's do a day with this and a day with that. Same idea of like, fuel with this type of fuel and go do your thing. And then fuel with a different type of fuel and go do your thing and see which one ends up lasting longer or giving you more energy or making you run to the bathroom or whatever it is, right? I know in test prep, I always tell my students that I want them to have a healthy breakfast with some carbs, protein, and fat mixed in.
Yes.
But that they have to do that on their practice tests days as well, because they got to figure out like when they're going to have to go to the bathroom, because having to, go pee in the middle of the reading section is really suboptimal for a test result,
Yes. All of that matters.
It totally does. Okay, so talk to me about this whole sugar thing, because sugar is really kind of a bad word at this point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's a bad word, but I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, and rightfully so. It's 9 times more addictive than cocaine. And let's accept it. Like, it's legal, it's socially acceptable. We throw it at kids at a young age at parades. We bribe them with it. We reward them with it. Like, it's a thing. And this is so hard for me because that's what I grew up with. And so many times I'll be like, oh, let's celebrate you. And then I'm like, okay, but how do we do that without like going for a cupcake or going to the coffee shop? Like, how can we have a celebration without sugar all the time? So I think there is a place for it.
I would even say that that's kind of like a systemic societal issue for us, right?
Totally.
Like, how do we celebrate that doesn't involve food? How do we celebrate as adults, many of us, in a way that doesn't include alcohol?
Totally.
Right? And so I think this is a derivative of a larger construct. Because I mean, who doesn't want birthday cake?
Right.
You know?
And in fact, just yesterday, I was at the kids' school. We do birthday treat day once a month. It's great. Parents donate donuts and cookies and cupcakes. And so everybody in the middle school and high school gets their treat.
So what's the challenge with it? Like, okay, so it's 9 times more addictive than cocaine. Why is that a bad thing? I mean, aside from like the societal understanding of addiction, right?
Yeah.
What does it actually do in the body? And then what does it do mental health wise?
I think sugar is also a big cause of anxiety and stress and overwhelm, for sure, just because of how it impacts the brain, how it impacts the body, how it impacts the blood sugar, what it does to the pancreas, what it does to our hormones. It affects our adrenal glands. Those are the glands that kind of help our bodies regulate stress. Like, it makes everything go kind of haywire. And because of the dopamine release, we need more of it to get that same feel-good feeling. And that's where the addictive component comes in. But I think too, Clarissa, it's hidden in everything. So I guess the takeaway from today is start reading your labels like it's hidden in sugar. So just start reading your labels. Look at where sugar is showing up. Know that it doesn't just say sugar. It will show up as high fructose corn syrup or dextrose or maltodextrose, or it has several different names. So the more aware that you can be of where it's hiding, the more mindful you can be about having it when you choose to, rather than just kind of not knowing that you're having it with ketchup.
Right. Oh, absolutely. So then does it do anything? I mean, you talked about it impacts the brain, it impacts the pancreas, clearly, which is why sugar is a challenge for folks who navigate diabetes, right? Because that's an issue with the pancreas. It hits the adrenals. Is there anything in particular that it does? We have a lot of conversations about, kids shouldn't be drinking at young ages. Kids shouldn't be trying pot at young ages because of the maladaptive nature, right? The negative impacts of those.
Yeah.
What do we know? Like, what impacts does sugar have on the developing brain? Do we have that research? Like, has that been done? Or is that kind of like...
That's a good question. I don't know that I have seen anything on that. Truth be told, I also haven't researched that. So it could be, and I'm not aware of it, but it's a good thing to look into.
Well, and it just came up for me, and thank you for allowing me to just kind of like toss questions at you. Because we've obviously had conversations, especially, I mean, I live in Colorado where marijuana is legal if you are of age. It's becoming a much more common conversation. Clearly the drinking age isn't until 21, and there's been research about the impact of marijuana in particular on developing brains. And so that's just kind of where my brain went.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
So go ahead.
I was just going to add to that point. I think another thing that our generation has really fallen prey to is the fat-free era, right? Like with the Olestra chips and the SnackWells.
Yeah.
Our brains and bodies need fat. So healthy fats are great because when those food manufacturers pull the fat out, they replace it with sugar. And so products that don't contain a lot of fat, fiber, and protein have a lot of sugar. And fat, fiber, and protein help the body kind of better break down and absorb the sugar so it's not such a shock.
Got it. So what you're telling us is that eating fuller fat isn't bad.
No,
Okay.
coconut oil, nuts. What else? Avocado oil. Like there are so many avocado, so many good healthy fats, but I think fat's been given a bad name.
Yeah, I agree. I like my fatty foods.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps a little too much. So then, okay, so sugar, which, we take the fat out, we replace it with sugar to make it more palatable, more tasty, so that we'll actually eat the thing.
More addictive.
Right? Exactly. Dopamine hits, which let's also, talk about kids who deal with ADD and ADHD. Yeah. Sugar releases dopamine in the brain. ADD and ADHD, or at least ADHD, is an issue of constantly needing that dopamine fill, or that dopamine fix. So how do we work to disentangle ourselves from the cycle of sugar, 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 and more sugar?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to being aware of where it's creeping in. Because a lot of people will tell me, I don't eat a lot of sugar. I don't give my kids a lot of sugar. And I believe you. Like, I don't think that people are just sitting here, like, giving their kids, the sugar bowls full of sugar. I think it's sneaking in unknowingly in places like ketchup and things we don't know. So I think really kind of doing your due diligence and looking at those labels and seeing what is actually in your food. Because dyes are another bad one. There's food dye and pickles. Don't ask me why. But just being mindful of where those things come in that are really not serving anybody from a nutritional perspective, especially our kids.
Right. So be aware of it. Bring in healthy foods along the way, right? And say if you're going to have a pack of Cheetos, fine, but have a carrot as well. Getting
maybe
kids
2
involved. Maybe 2 carrots. This week will be 1 carrot. Next week it'll be 2 carrots.
There you go.
Next week it'll be a half a pack of Cheetos and 2 carrots.
Yep.
And then agency, like you said, getting them involved. How young do you feel like kids can realistically be part of the food planning? And I know this is hard because every kid's different. Every kid develops differently. But like by and large, I mean, should we be starting to have these conversations with kids about how do you feel like when they're 6 and 7 years old? Is that viable, do you think?
I think it's absolutely viable. And I think that's a huge blessing in our story is our daughter was vomiting every night and we couldn't figure out why. And come to find out she was intolerant to gluten and dairy. And so she knows because she had that stint before we knew that's what was causing it. When I eat gluten and dairy, I feel sick. It makes me sick. And so she learned in like preschool that certain foods make her feel a certain way. And that, I mean, it was a terrible, painful time, but like looking back, she learned how to connect those dots. It taught me how to connect the dots. So I think, they're aware, they know when they need to go to the bathroom once they're potty trained. We can be talking to them about how foods are making them feel too. If they're hungry, if they're full, what that looks like, how to figure out when they're hungry. Not because it's noon, but like, what is your body telling you? How do you know you're hungry? And then how do you know you're full instead of you have to clean your plate?
Well, and so that's exactly where my brain was going is like, I very much remember there are children starving in Africa. You have to eat every bite on your plate. And, and then like my husband just like straight up doesn't like cheese. Weirdo as far as I'm concerned. Because I've never met a cheese I didn't like. But like, mac and cheese is like the go-to for so many families, right?
Yeah.
And yet that just wasn't his preference, so like, what do you do when you've got a kid? Like, how do you navigate whether it's like they genuinely just don't like something versus they're just not wanting to eat it tonight?
And that's a constant battle we fight with one in our house. My theory is let them try it. Like I've taken the time to make this out of respect and courtesy. You're going to try a couple of bites. See if your taste buds have changed. They change. Maybe you'll like it this time. If you don't, that's okay. Let's figure out something else together that you can have.
Fair enough. Well, because then that goes down a whole other rabbit hole, which we won't get into today of, some families find themselves in situations where they're making 3 different meals. Right. Which is exhausting, I have to imagine.
Yep.
Number one. And I mean, not just because like in my household, I'm vegetarian and my husband is not, even he doesn't always make multiple meals. It's just variations on a theme for us. But that's a whole other conversation. So, all right. So clearly food impacts. Be intentional and like testing things, like make it like a family experiment when you've got more of one thing on a day, more of another thing on another day, etc. And kind of a recap of how do we feel, getting them involved with meal planning and, okay, you don't like it this way. I mean, what kid isn't addicted to YouTube at this point? What a great
Right.
way to give them the YouTube that they want,
Yeah.
but say, hey, why don't you go, like, find some other ways that we could cook Brussels sprouts? Because when you said
Mhm.
asparagus earlier, I was like, okay, I'm going to be really impressed if you say that your kids eat Brussels sprouts.
I think I have one that does.
Fair. It's better than a lot of families. It's better than my family growing up. I wouldn't eat them. My mother boiled them to within inches of their lives, and they were gross. But you know, discovering, like, how do we discover that your daughter likes the vegetables roasted? Maybe that's a case where, like, okay, you don't like them this way or that way. I want you to go find 3 different ways that we could make asparagus, and we'll try all 3 of them and see which one you like best. And if we've tried all 3 of them and you still really hate it, then we'll agree that you don't like asparagus.
Totally. And you're equipping them to learn how to cook too in the process, which I don't think we're teaching home ec anymore. So that's not a bad thing.
At least not in the same way, right?
Right.
Awesome. And then pay attention to the sugar terminology. Can you give us a rundown of those terms again to pay attention to where sugar hides?
Yeah, for sure. And I actually have a list. If you want me to pass that on to you, people can grab it because there's like probably 70 names, but the big ones are like high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, maltodextrose, rice syrup. Basically, if it ends in an OSC and has syrup, it's sugar.
Okay, that's a really easy way of putting it. Awesome.
I think.
Okay.
Let me double check that.
No. Where can folks find that?
Where do you want me to put it? I can.
If you want to send it to me or anybody who comments, we can send it to you, or is it on your website somewhere?
It's not on my website.
Okay. Well, your website is in all of the descriptions of these events. So what we can say, it's in our Facebook group, on our LinkedIn page, and on YouTube. So if anyone's listening, even if this is like 5 years from now, Melissa's website is in the description. Feel free to hit our website, reach out to her as well, or reach out to us through Parent Tween Connection, and we will find her for you. So number one, Melissa, thank you for your time. I think eating and eating healthfully beyond just what does it taste like and how does, what does the scale say, which is, again, a completely different conversation, is a conversation that we don't have enough with our kids. Mm-hmm. So I'm thrilled that we were able to at least give folks some ideas of how to start having those conversations and how to implement some of this at home, as well as recognizing some of the challenges with sugar. So thank you for the knowledge.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time. And for folks who are listening, again, shameless plug, Melissa has donated her time to us today as part of Empowerthon, which is our fundraiser. So the link to her fundraising page is in the description in all the places. So if you learned something today, the best way that we'd like to ask you to say thank you is with a donation. It can be as little as $5, but every $5 matters. Again, we're aiming to launch the foundation so that we can help families gain access to working with professionals like Melissa and, health professionals, mental health professionals, academic support, college admissions, the gamut of what families need support with. So we appreciate anything that you can do. So Melissa, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing. So thank you for doing this.
Awesome.
Much needed.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, over and out. We'll see you next time.